By itself, architecturally, it's a great deal. Totally fine. Execution-wise, yeah, there's nothing to it. But of course, that's not Donald Trump's problem. That's the problem with every single deal that's ever taken place in the Middle East that has involved the Palestinians, that has involved terrorist organizations, which is execution doesn't happen.
Welcome to the Diplomacy Podcast, where we explore how diplomacy shapes our world and our lives. I'm Nicholas Kralev. Today we're talking about the Trump administration's deal to end the war in Gaza in the context of the broader Middle East policy. My guest is Danielle Pletka, a distinguished senior fellow in foreign and defense policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute, where she was the senior vice president for foreign policy and defense studies until 2020. I've known her for more than 20 years and often quoted her in my stories when I was a journalist. So great to see you again. Welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
So it's been a few days now since the Gaza deal, at least the first phase, to which we were told that Israel and Hamas had agreed. 20 of the hostages have been released. Some bodies have been returned as well. But currently, not only the two envoys, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, but also the vice president is in Israel. So one wonders, why do three senior American officials need to be in Israel so soon after the president was there? But before we get to that, can I ask you for your analysis of at least the first phase so far, although it's difficult, I know, to look at it in isolation of the rest of the 20 points. But the president has won much praise. Do you think that's deserved? And how do you see this deal playing out, at least in the short and medium term?
Look, yes, absolutely. This was a good deal. But it was a good deal insofar as there was going to be a deal. We have a conflict that had been ongoing for 2 years. The prime minister of the state of Israel laid down his conditions, which were that the first thing to happen would be the return of all of the living hostages and dead. Okay. Then that there would be the disarmament of Hamas, that Hamas would be barred from any further involvement in the governance of Gaza. And if you had said a month ago that those conditions would be met, people would have laughed at you. Rightly so, because Bibi Netanyahu was accused of laying down unmeetable conditions. Bibi Netanyahu was accused of being completely unrealistic. Bibi Netanyahu was accused of seeking to prolong the war at the expense of the hostages. And at the end of the day, what he got was exactly what he asked for. And the way that Donald Trump was able to muscle the Arabs into muscling Hamas, particularly Qatar and Turkey, who are two of the most important countries to Hamas, was extremely capable. The final point on the deal is this. By itself, architecturally, it's a great deal. Totally fine. Execution-wise, yeah, there's nothing to it. But of course, that's not Donald Trump's problem. That's the problem with every single deal that's ever taken place in the Middle East that has involved the Palestinians, that has involved terrorist organizations, which is execution doesn't happen. The ceasefire is already falling apart. I suspect that the rest of this goes in fits and starts, fundamentally nowhere.
Well, let me go back to the actual diplomacy, and in particular, the role that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner played, because they were the president's men on the ground. Some of us have been criticizing Witkoff for months now for his ineptness, quite honestly, particularly with dealing with Russia. And the fact that not only did he not have any experience and expertise, but he refused to learn. And he kept going into those meetings with Putin without an interpreter, let alone a note taker. And consequently, as we saw actually happen, he conveyed to the president the wrong information because he misunderstood it in that last meeting before the Alaska summit. So were we too harsh on Witkoff, or was it that Jared was actually the person who made the difference? How do you see that?
Look, I think you described Witkoff incredibly accurately. He may be an amazing guy, a great real estate investor, a really good golfer, but he's a shitty diplomat. And not just that, but that he has proven himself willing to be, not just once, but on repeated occasions, a useful idiot for whether it is the Putins or it is the government in Qatar. He has proven himself to be a conduit for their perspective inside the White House. And I suspect had Jared Kushner not joined the negotiations, none of this would have happened because, of course, you know, Danielle Pletka, Nicholas Kralev, who are we, right? Who are we to question the president of the United States? On the other hand, if this is obvious to you and to me, I suspect it's also pretty painfully obvious to Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem, right? And yet he was willing to do this deal. And I think the reason he was willing to do the deal was not because he has Trump over his, over a hump or anything else, but because Jared Kushner, who does know and has experience in the region because of the Abraham Accords and has built a lot of trust, was involved. Now, I hope I'm not being unfair. Perhaps Steve Witkoff is shining his pro-democratic, anti-war, anti-terrorist lights under a bushel, and all of us pedestrians don't recognize his many, many gifts. I suspect that that's not the case, and that the only change that happened in the run-up to the ceasefire was the sudden reappearance of Jared Kushner. Let's just roll back the time machine for a moment and talk about the Israeli strike on Qatar. Okay. So right in the midst of the never-ending ceasefire negotiations that have been going on for the last year plus, the Israelis make a decision that they are going to strike the Hamas leadership, not in Gaza, where they're all dead anyway, but in Qatar. Now, what happens? They miss. The guys left their cell phones in there, but were not in the room that the Israelis hid. The Qataris didn't know the strike was coming. The Israelis informed the Americans only at the last minute, and everybody was very cross. The Israelis were cross that they missed. Hamas was cross because they don't want to die. The Trump administration was very cross, right? Making us look bad, blah, 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 blah. And of course, the Qataris were incandescent. The Israelis scared the living daylights out of them. If that hadn't happened, there wouldn't have been a ceasefire. Because all of a sudden, Qatar told Hamas something that it had not told them before. Now consider this, your listeners should understand, had not told Hamas before, which is, if you don't agree, you're out, right? Leave. You have to let go of the hostages. The hostages are a diminishing asset for you. Interestingly, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, our wonderful NATO ally, also weighed in and basically said, we're not getting the return on investment we were hoping for here. You need to give up the hostages. We'll figure everything else out later. And so that's what happened. Finally, after saying no, after saying we won't do it, after saying you don't get to dictate how we conduct this war on the Jews, suddenly Hamas gave up the hostages. And I think that's hugely important to understand, because even if you want to add in Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and all of the rest of it, had the Israelis not struck Qatar, shown that they could, not just could, but easily, right? It's like being attacked in your own home. This is how you suddenly think differently. None of this would have happened.
You said earlier that you don't see this broader deal going anywhere. Does this have to do with something you actually wrote a couple of weeks ago, which was that the Trump administration doesn't understand what the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is about, that this is not about land, right? This is not a territorial dispute.
Yes, absolutely. Americans are not really ideologues in the same way. And, we can talk about MAGA till we're blue in the face, and we can talk about Mamdani being an Islamist till we're blue in the face. But the reality is that since the fall of communism, we have lost this sense for what it means to oppose an ideologue. And one thing we understand about ideological opponents is they are, where we are not, capable of playing the long game. This is very important. They understand when you're weak. They understand that sometimes they need to lose a battle in order to win the war. But Hamas is part of this broader Islamist Muslim Brotherhood collective, and they all have different names, right? You have Al-Qaeda, you have ISIS, you have Al-Shabaab, and to a certain extent, you even have the Shia groups, Hezbollah, and others. And of course, you have Hamas, and these are Islamists, right? Their goal is not a better Gaza. Their goal is not to end the occupation. Their goal is not to get UNRWA back up and moving again, or to ensure that they have whole grain bread in their supermarkets. Their goal is the annihilation of the state of Israel. And that goal is not compatible with peace agreements, right? And that goal, which is the annihilation of the state of Israel, is not the end goal. The end goal is the annihilation of Western civilization. Anytime someone like me says that, people just go, "Oh my God, what is wrong with these apocalyptic idiots? No one wants the end of Western civilization." And the answer is, well, actually, that's what they want. And they think that they're on track. Right? This is what Osama thought. This is what Ayman Zawahiri thought. This is what all of the ideologues of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Hamas think. And all you need to do is go and read Hamas's founding manifesto, and you see it. But at the end of the day, what that means is Hamas may go for the moment. They may lose this battle. For all intents and purposes, they have in a lot of ways lost, unless you consider dying a victory. But they're not on their way out by any standard. Right? And not only that, most importantly, they continue to have an enormous amount of support. Maybe not as much from the Gazans who've lost family members, who've starved, who've been press ganged, who had their houses blown up. But in Qatar, they have support. In Egypt, they have. In Jordan, also. In Turkey, absolutely. In Iran, for sure. That's the problem.
Well, the Israeli government has repeatedly said that their goal is obliterating Hamas, right? Is that possible?
No, of course not. And they know it. The Israelis can't eradicate Hamas. They need to eradicate the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they can't do that because they need help. And more importantly than that, you can't just kill all the people. You need to beat it with something else. And there's no substitute right now.
Do you believe that Hamas and other such organizations really want a Palestinian state?
I think there are some among the Palestinians who want a Palestinian state. Some of the Fatah guys, some of the other guys, they just want a state. And that's the problem with Hamas. Their goal is not a Palestinian state. Their goal is the eradication of the Jewish state. And that's unachievable, right? That is unachievable. They cannot beat Israel. They can kill 1,200 Israelis in one day. They'd be perfectly happy to take a Palestinian state and use it as a beachhead. But do they want a Palestinian state in order to deliver to the Palestinian people all of the things that the Jews have been denying them these many years since the Nakba? Of course not. There's absolutely no evidence of that because when they have had sovereignty since 2005 in Gaza, since 1993 in the West Bank, where they have had sovereignty, they haven't done squat. The Palestinians are by any measure worse off now than they were when they were living under the sovereignty of the Israelis. Period. End of story.
Just to qualify that, of course, in the last 2 years, they did worse off. But do you mean that they were worse off even before October 7, 2023?
Of course. Look at their GDP per capita. Look at their productivity. Look at the number of women involved in business. Look at their economic productivity. They are a basket case. And insofar as there are numbers that suggest that they are not, they are and were for many, many years the single largest per capita recipient of foreign aid from the outside world. Where did that go? What do they have to show for it? I mean, absolutely nothing.
Do you believe it's realistic that Hamas will disarm?
No, of course not. How are they going to disarm? Who's going to disarm them? Donald Trump? Who? SEAL Team 6? I mean, I don't know who's going to disarm them. The Arabs? The Pakistanis and the Indonesians?
You said earlier about the 20-point plan that you don't see this going anywhere and beyond what has happened already with the hostages and the ceasefire. And I also mentioned at the beginning that the two envoys, Witkoff and Kushner, and the vice president are currently, at least as we speak, in Israel trying to, they say, bolster or boost or strengthen the deal. To me, it seems more like trying to salvage it than strengthen it. But what do you think is the right move for the administration right now?
That's a great question. They need to answer the question that you asked me, right? Who is disarming Hamas? Donald Trump loves to issue ultimatums and, Lord love him. I think his heart's in the right place, but I don't think that he understands what it will take to disarm Hamas. I mean, unless they're game for a Fallujah style operation, bring back H.R. McMaster, who knew how to do that kind of thing. I don't see how they're going to do it. You need to go house to house, or you need to bomb block to block. You need to take arms out of tunnels where they've been hidden, out of gardens, out of kindergartens, out of mosques. You need to find the people who have them. The Israelis haven't done it, and they've been in Gaza for 2 years. They are very motivated, and they're really very good. They really are. And I get that they're handicapped by the fact that they don't actually, notwithstanding the calumnies of the anti-Semites, I get that they don't want to kill too many people. And that stands in the way, because if you are willing to kill everybody, you will disarm them. But we're not willing to kill everybody either. So I don't get what the plan is. It can't be a peacekeeping force, because we've seen how that works with UNIFIL and Hezbollah. It can't be the Israelis, because the Israelis don't want to do it. And the Arabs obviously don't want the Israelis to do it. If it's going to be an Arab peacekeeping force, I mean, I don't want to call it an oxymoron, but close. And so I just don't get it. I don't get how it happens. That is my honest statement. I don't get how it happens.
Back to Kushner in particular, but also Witkoff, because of course, even though he has divested, as he said on 60 Minutes, from his companies, his son is still very much actively seeking business in that very region. The question about conflict of interest came up, and of course they brushed it off. But do you see anything troubling, as other analysts have seen in the last few weeks?
Oh, how could you not? I mean, of course, this is corruption. This is corruption 101.
We have a few minutes left. Let me pull back and look at US policy in the Middle East, do you think there have been at least some contours laid down in terms of an existing US policy in the Middle East in the second Trump administration?
I think that's a great question. Whenever you talk about sort of, strategy, which is basically what you're saying, does he have a strategy that will lead to a specific end in the Middle East, which is, what what a policy is. My answer is Donald Trump strategy. I'm not sure. But I do think that he has a vision. You know, it's very interesting. Just as I was very impressed in his first term that Donald Trump's uninterest in what everybody was telling him about how the Middle East works ended up at the Abraham Accords. No, you can't do this, you can't do that, you have to deal with this, you have to talk to so-and-so, you have to do this. Everything runs through fill in the blank, right? And he was like, I don't really care, right? I think the Arabs are scared of the Iranians and I don't want to defend them, but I think the Israelis want to defend them because they got a shared enemy. So let's make that work. And lo and behold, right? They did. And that ability to shuck off the fetters of the peace process was brilliant. Brilliant. Let's give Donald Trump credit for that and say, and Jared Kushner too, we don't like giving them credit. They're not, they're not chin stroking. They're not elegant. They don't go to fancy conferences like we do. They don't know everybody at the State Department. On the other hand, they achieved something that people said was unachievable in the region. And they did it in a way that it has been sustained even through everything that has happened over the last 2 years in Gaza. And so kudos to them. So based on that, I do think that the administration has I do think the administration has a plan. I think that plan involves status quo ante. In other words, that the question of Gaza gets roped off into oh, you guys go deal with that. You guys go have another meeting about that. Yeah, we should definitely talk about that, right? But the Israelis fundamentally keep a lid on it. And then they go back to the Saudis. And they say, okay, we're on a pathway towards a Palestinian state. It's going to look like this. Qataris have to cough up some money. People have to do some reconstruction. We need to get back on track with this whole regional peace. And that's their aim. And I think, and I know this is hard for the Saudis, but at the end of the day, of course, we all know the truth. The Saudis don't give a damn about the Palestinians. Nobody gives a damn about the Palestinians. That is the Palestinian problem, right? No one cares. This is their tragedy. Their tragedy is not the creation of the state of Israel. Their tragedy is no one really gives a damn about their future, right? Because if they did, somebody would have done something for them that would have given them something better than Mahmoud Abbas and Yahya Sinwar. So I think that that's the vision of the Trump administration. I give them at least a solid chance of getting towards another couple peace agreements between the Arabs and the Israelis by the end of the Trump term. Of course, I could look like a complete idiot as well, because God knows that has only happened thousands of times before, being a Middle East expert.
Yes. So, well, although the Middle East is your regional expertise, you, of course, have a much broader experience than that. And you work for the American Enterprise Institute, which is known as a conservative think tank or conservative leaning think tank. That said, you, as we already heard, you have criticized the Trump administration and praised it when you believe it deserves it. So at the end of our episode, can you share your analysis? We are, 9 months? Just about 9 months into the second Trump administration. In terms of foreign policy, how do you think Trump looks to the world?
I'm not from America originally, although I love America. We have always, for the last, let's say 75 years, since about 1950, we have always had this problem, right? Which is that everybody wants us to defend them, but everybody loves to hate us. I mean, I was born in Australia. Australia has a love-hate relationship with America like no other. But you see this all over Europe as well, right? It is, the disgust and the contempt that average people and certainly intellectual elites have for the American government and the American people. And that has always been the sort of the tension. And we've put up with that crap. Right, because at the end of the day, and this is the one thing that Donald Trump doesn't understand, at the end of the day, the NATO alliance, our transatlantic alliances, our Pacific alliances are important to us because they're important to us.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate all your insight.
I'm very grateful to you for inviting me. It's great to see you again. Good luck, especially with the Washington International Diplomatic Academy. You've got so many great people, and with the podcast. Thanks for having me.
Thank you again. And thank you for joining us. Remember, diplomacy is the world's best hope. See you next time.